Starting us off at number 10 is Ricardo Ash. This guy has impressive qualifications. He's a gynecologist, obstetrician, endocrinologist, and a fugitive. He pioneered GIFT, aka gamete intrafallopian transfer, which is not something you'd think a criminal could be capable of doing. However, in 1995, Ricardo and his two partners were accused of taking women's eggs without their consent and using it for other patients so they could conceive. 15 children were born from the misuse of these eggs, but he wasn't arrested since technically this wasn't a crime. Worried he could somehow end up in jail, Ricardo sold his properties and fled to Mexico and was arrested in Argentina in 2004. An extradition request for him was denied and he fled back to Mexico, where he was rearrested in 2010. He was set for parole in 2011 and was released, but the US still wanted to extradite him, yet he's nowhere to be found. It's been 9 years, no one knows where the hell Ricardo is. And he stole some people's eggs, so he needs to get arrested.
Our number 9 on this list, anyone who's wanted, well, the reward for finding them is $20 million. Alright, so anyone who's anyone's who's wanted reward is $20 million. Well, they have to be a pretty freaky fellow. Well, Rafael Caro Quintero, well, he's apparently still wanted by several 3-letter agencies, and also made famous by Netflix's Narcos series. Well, let's take a look at how this dude wound it up on this list. Well, Rafael Caro Quintero, he was born on October 3rd, 1952. Well, he's a Mexican drug trafficker who co-founded the now disintegrated Guadalajara cartel. He founded this with Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo and along with other drug traffickers in the 1970s. He is the brother of fellow drug trafficker Miguel Caro Quintero. He was the founder and former leader of the defunct Sonora cartel. When he was a teenager, Caro Quintero allegedly began to grow marijuana on a low scale at the ranch owned by his brother Jorge Luis. In less than 5 years, Caro Quintero managed to buy several other ranches in the surrounding areas, and he began to amass a fortune. He has been cited as a pioneer, like imagine being the pioneer to like a drug trade in Mexico, and he is described as one of the preeminent drug traffickers of his generation. But if that's not enough, of course there is murder in the mix. Up next, number 8, we have Alexis Flores. He was born in 1975. He is a Honduran fugitive. Flores is the 487th fugitive to be placed on the FBI's most top 10 wanted fugitives list. So on March 22, 2007, a local arrest warrant was obtained in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and Florence was charged with the murder and various other felonies to go along with that. On the same day, a federal arrest warrant for Flores was obtained in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and he was charged with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. I mean, anyone on this list, if they're caught, they're gonna try to flee. Well, Flores was added to the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives list in 2007, and there was a reward of up to $100,000 for just information that would lead to his capture. This is offered by the FBI. A lot of these people on the most wanted list, they're very valuable, which makes it really hard for them to stay on the run because everyone is looking for them. Everyone wants to cash in a big day. Coming in hot, and at number 7 on this list is George Edward Wright. Well, he is wanted for his involvement in a series of crimes dating back to 1962. I mean, this guy has been on the run for a very long time. This guy's no stranger to doing some pretty terrible things. Well, let's check them out and travel back through time. On November 23rd, 1962, Wright and an accomplice who was later arrested shot and killed the owner of a gas station in Wall, New Jersey during the commission of a robbery at a business. On December 13th, 1962, Wright was indicted for the murder. He entered a plea of no defense and was sentenced to prison for a period of 15 to 30 years. Then on August 22nd, 1970, Wright escaped from the New Jersey State Prison in Leesburg, New Jersey. So the state of New Jersey issued an arrest warrant for Wright after he was charged with escape, and on August 26, 1970, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Wright in the United States District Court, District of New Jersey. And then after that, he was charged with unlawful flight to avoid confinement. Anyone who escapes from prison is an automatic red flag criminal. And number 6, we're bringing you a pretty intense story about domestic terrorism and one slippery member of a domestic terrorist group that got away. Josephine Sunshine Overacre, an American citizen believed to be either 43 or 46 years old. I mean, why do we even care? Well, they fled to Europe in the late 2001s. Overacre faces 19 felony charges charges: conspiracy to commit arson and destruction of an energy facility, attempted arson, and arson in the District of Oregon. Also in the Western District of Washington and the District of Colorado. This person just wanted to go everywhere, just light everything up. In 2004, the FBI merged 7 independent investigators from its Portland, Oregon field office, and they called them Operation Backfire. According to an agency statement, the operational focus is on investigating acts of domestic terrorism carried out on behalf of 2 activist groups. So she was suspected of at least 25 domestic terrorism acts, including the $26 million firebombing of a Vail ski resort in Colorado in 1999. And then she was arrested in Cuba in 2018, and right now in 2020, she's somewhere out there. We have no idea where. Okay, so right now we're halfway through this list. This next gem of a monster is still on the loose, and the reason behind it is still gut-wrenching. Yasser Abdul Saeed, born in 1957, is a fugitive of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, an Egyptian resident of the United States. So he could be living amongst you guys. I know a lot of you guys are from the States. Well, he is wanted for the murder of his 2 teenage daughters in Irving, Texas. Saeed, who was very controlling over his family, was believed to have felt that his daughter, Amania, and Sarah dishonored the family by refusing to adhere to the standards to the traditional Egyptian culture behavior. So he killed his daughters because of their behavior, but their behavior wasn't abnormal. He was very controlling. All right, from there, let's move on. Number 4. Okay, so this next one has an unexpected twist, so I just had to add it in. We're talking about Mark Stephen Bauman. He allegedly sexually assaulted a 7-year-old girl during a 6-month period in 2002, and this according to the Texas authorities. He is on the list of the 10 most wanted sex offenders in the States, and he is thought to be in Mexico right now, but I mean, we haven't found this person, so we don't actually know his whereabouts. Well, Bauman was known to have ties to Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and Colombia. In 2007, a probation violation of an original offense, aggravated sexual assault of a child warrant, was issued by the Travis County Sheriff's Office for his arrest. Additional warrants were also issued for Bauman's arrest in 2007 by the Austin Police Department for possession of child pornography, improper photography, and failure to comply with sex offender registration requirements. While the U.S. Marshal have also issued a warrant for Bauman's arrest for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. I mean, I think we can put this on everyone. We can say that everyone tried to avoid prosecution because a lot of these guys are wanted for some pretty horrible things, and when they're captured, well, they're gone away for life anyway, so what are they going to lose? All right, in at number 3, we have a guy who's been out there on the loose for the past 44 years, and that's as of February of 2020. Well, there is a prolific killer on the loose. Former State Department Foreign Service Officer William Bradford Bishop. He murdered his whole family in Bethesda and then suddenly just disappeared. This is a killer mastermind. Investigators said on March 1st, 1976, Bishop told his boss that he was sick. Well, he went into Sears at Montgomery Mall. He bought a sledgehammer and a gas can. He fueled up the station wagon, got a shovel and pitchfork at the Bethesda hardware store, went home, killed his wife, then his 3 sons, and then his mother. He took the hammer that he bought and beat her over the head and killed her in just the most terrible way that you can think of. So first this guy killed his wife, and then he killed his kids who were getting ready for bed. They were in pajamas, and then blood splatter that he left behind shows him going to the back of his house, and that's where he killed his own mother. And then he drove south to North Carolina, dumped the bodies in a grave he dug, and set them on fire, and then drove to the Great Smoky Mountains and then vanished. Next up on this list, number 2, I mean, I have to include this on this list. A lot of people will find this humorous, but this is a pretty serious deal. So for all you cool cats and kittens out there, you know where I'm going with this one. We're talking about Carol Baskin. Well, Carol Baskin, we know where she is. She's at Joe's zoo because she just overtook his zoo. I'm pretty sure she is now the proud owner of his zoo while he's in jail with, I'm pretty sure, with the virus. And I hope Trump is able to do one thing good and get him out of prison. Well, in this one, in number 2, we're talking about Carol Baskin's husband. I mean, where is he? I know in the show, in the Netflix documentary, they were kidding about maybe feeding him, like the possibility of feeding him to a tiger. Well, it seems fairly plausible because there is no way that this guy just packed up and left town. Is Carol Baskin a murderer? Do we have the wrong person in jail? I think Joe and Carol Baskin, and a lot of people, I'm sure millions of people can agree with this, I think they should switch places because I'm pretty sure she murdered her husband, unless this guy is a genius, wanted to get away from her, and he just disappeared. So the big question is Carol Baskin's husband still in hiding? Is he going to reappear one day? I don't think so. And finally, number 1, we have Gillian Maxwell, the youngest of Elizabeth and Robert Maxwell's 9 children, and he was born in France in 1961. Well, the family lived in an English mansion, and her father was the founder of a media empire and served in Parliament. Maxwell attended one of the UK's most exclusive boarding schools, and then Oxford University. So we're talking about a pretty, rich family background, and someone who's very intelligent. Well, as members of the British High Society, Maxwell mingled with some of the nation's most celebrated families and became friends with Prince Andrew. After Epstein's death in 2019, Gillian literally fell off the face of the earth. This month it was reported that lawyers for accusers seeking to file a civil suit against Maxwell have been unable to locate her. This is a very curious case of someone in hiding indeed. I mean, what did they do? What are they hiding from?
Starting us off at number 10 is Sharon Kin. Known as La Pistolera in Mexico, Sharon Kin, also known as Jeanette Pugliese, is the subject of the longest current outstanding arrest warrant for murder in Kansas City history. She actually has one of the longest outstanding felony warrants in history, so I mean, firstly, congrats on your achievements, Sharon. Psych! Now, Sharon married James Kin back in 1956 after she faked her own pregnancy. By 1960, he was contemplating divorce due to her infidelity and spending habits. March 19th, 1960, Sharon heard a gunshot coming from James's bedroom, and she found her 2-year-old daughter Dana with a gun in her hand and James bleeding from a gunshot wound on the back of his head. He was dead before the ambulance even got there. Now, James let Dana play with his guns often, and the death was ruled an accident. The next death was Patricia Jones, wife to Walter Jones Jr., who was having an affair with Sharon. Now, Sharon told him she was pregnant in hopes that he would divorce Patricia, but instead he ended their affair. Later that day, Sharon called Patricia telling her Walter was having an affair with her sister and that she wanted to talk about it. She was never seen alive again, and her body was found that night a mile out of town. She had been shot 4 times. Sharon was trials for both murders, and in fact there were 4 trials for James's murder. Now, before the 4th one, she was free on bond and fled to Mexico with her lover. There she killed another man in apparent self-defense, which nobody believed. Come on, Sharon, you've killed 2 people now 3. You think the 3rd one is an accident? Hell no. Sharon was sentenced to 13 years in prison but escaped from Iztapalapa prison in December of 1969. She had bribed the guards to look the other way while she escaped, and so a manhunt ensued, and more than 50 years later, she still hasn't been found. Many people think she's dead. Honestly, she's probably not. Coming in at number 9 is Vassilis Al Costas. From the name, you can probably guess that Vassilis is Greek and was accused of being the mastermind behind kidnapping industrialist Yorios Milonas. Greek names are very hard, you guys, just give me a break. The ransom paid for him was eventually traced back to Vassilis, making him the prime and only suspect. Then in 2000, he was convicted for kidnapping the CEO of Haitaglu Bros back in 1995 and sentenced to 25 years in jail. In June of 2006, 2 of his accomplices hired a sightseeing helicopter and then hijacked it and forced the pilot to fly to the prison at gunpoint. Guards thought the helicopter were prison inspectors and let the prisoners be flown to a cemetery next to the jail where they all fled, Vassilis included. He was recaptured in 2008 but escaped yet again a year later by helicopter again. A rope ladder was thrown down for him and his cellmate as the helicopter hovered above the jail courtyard. Guards tried firing at the lady in the helicopter, but she had a damn automatic rifle, so they obviously lost. The helicopter was found abandoned in a suburb in Athens with the pilot bound and gagged. There's currently a €1 million bounty placed on any information about Vassilis' whereabouts. Honestly, pat on the back for me for trying to pronounce these Greek names. They all are complicated as hell. At number 8, we have Omid Tavili. Iranian-Canadian Omid is a gangster who is the kingpin of a huge crime family in Canada. The RCMP revealed he was arrested back in 2000 for having 3 kilograms of cocaine on him, but was found not guilty. He then ran a scam telemarketing business aimed at Americans and ended up stealing $3 million, mostly from old people that just fell for the scam. He was arrested in British Columbia in 2003 after the US District Court issued a federal arrest arrest warrant for him. 2 years later, he realized $300,000 of his drug money had gone missing and guessed it was his career that had taken it and fled. So to enact revenge, he kidnapped the dude's brother-in-law, sexually assaulted him, and then interrogated him before getting arrested himself. In 2007, the BC Supreme Court ordered him to be extradited to the US, but that didn't scare Omid since Amandeep Singh was his lawyer. The criminal and extradition lawyer that literally represents all these controversial criminals like Rakesh Saxena. Like, you know he's getting a lot of money for defending these criminals, but whatever. Either way, they filed for an appeal, and while waiting for the result, Omid disguised himself as janitor Edwin Teesney and escaped from jail. No one knows where he is today. Filling at number 7 slot is Alfred Stock. At 92 years old, this man committed heinous war crimes when he was a Nazi in the 40s. Anyway, he was accused of ordering the execution of 117 Italian prisoners of war. This was part of the slaughter of nearly 9,500 officers after the Germany-Italy alliance went to shit. The military court of Rome literally indicted him in 2012 and sentenced him to life in prison, but Germany still refuses to extradite him to Italy to serve his sentence. I've heard about a lot of Nazis that fled to South America and are just living there under new names, but this dude is literally sat at home in Germany hiding in plain sight because he knows the government won't do shit. Like, this man committed war crimes. Those are crimes against humanity and he has to be punished for them. Now at number 6 is John Rufo. Now this guy was the president of CCS, which is an IBM equipment reseller, before he went into hiding, so I mean, the man had moolah. Either way, in 1992 he met with his friend Edward J. Reynes, who had just been laid off from Philip Morris USA, and he told John about Project Star. It involved pitching a fake project to various bank executives claiming they were working on a top secret operation to develop smokeless cigarettes on behalf of Philip Morris. Newsflash, they're called vapes. Either way, John had a company, so it was very easy to forge everything they needed, and because Edward used to work with Philip, they never actually had to contact him. It was all going to plan until 96 when an employee noticed something off in one of the documents. He contacted Philip, then the FBI, and then everything went tits up. The duo had managed to get $350 million, but the FBI couldn't locate 21 million of it, so either way, where did it go? Edward was arrested and John went on the run. He didn't turn himself in and was last seen taking money out of an ATM before never being seen again. His car was found abandoned at JFK Airport, and he's currently still in hiding. $25,000 is being offered for any information on him, and he's actually in the US Marshals 15 Most Wanted list. Coming in at number 5 is Iqlaq Fakir Muhammad Sheikh. The Indian 29-year-old murderer has been in hiding since 2006. Gudrun Kovinu was an archaeologist that was a part of the Afar expedition undertaken in Ethiopia that led to the discovery of the skeleton Lucy. She was working at the Nepal Research Center and had moved there in 1984. For some reason, and no one knows why, I couldn't figure out why or find out why, but Iqlaq stabbed her to death before beheading her. She's an archaeologist, what did she do? Bund Garden police found her head within 7 hours of the murder and arrested him. The police then gave him 2 weeks parole to try and care for his sick wife, but that was the last time he was seen. They're assuming he ran off with his wife and mum and is currently still in hiding. I just don't get what possessed him to do that. At number 4 is Gilbert Winter. British-born Gilbert worked as a jeweler by day and enforcer for the Addams Family crime syndicate by night. Who knew a jeweler's life could be that dangerous? Nobody. But the Addams Family, aka the Clerkenwell Crime Syndicate, is an Irish criminal organization and is one of the most powerful ones in the UK. They're worth £200 million and have been linked to nearly 30 murders. In 1994, Gilbert and fellow enforcer Ray Barton ended up killing a drug dealer called Claude Mosley with a samurai sword. Which, I mean, fashionable, I have to say. They offed Claude because he was pocketing money from a drug operation run by the Addams Family, and that didn't go down well with them. Gilbert was put on trial for the murder, but since no one would testify, the case was dropped. Fast forward to March 1998, Gilbert vanishes into thin air. He was involved in a weed deal in which £800,000 went missing, so either he ran off with the money or the gang killed him. Saul in the home, the family's financial advisor, who was also part of that deal, was shot months later, so people think Gilbert disappeared so the family wouldn't kill him. Regardless, he's still a murderer and he's still wanted. Filling at number 3 slot is Achimez Gachiyayev. This guy used to serve in the Russian Strategic Rocket Forces and had been accused of being involved in the Russian apartment bombings of 1999 that killed nearly 300 people and kickstarted the Second Chechen War. 4 bombings took place between September 4th and 9th and targeted 4 apartment blocks. The bombs were later found on grounds that Achimez rented with 2 other people who founded his company. After the first 2 bombs went off, he actually called the police and warned them, so maybe he had had a change of heart midway. According to the Federal Security Service of Russia, he was given $500,000 from warlord Ibn al-Khattab for doing the deed. As the case was further investigated, Achimez fled to Georgia and then Turkey. He was last seen in March of 2002 and is still a fugitive in hiding that is wanted for terrorism. Now at number 2 is Pedro Alonso Lopez, known as the Monster of the Andes. Pedro is a serial killer who took the lives of many. Growing up, his mother worked as a prostitute, which had adverse effects on him. When he was 8, he was caught touching his younger sister, which caused him to get kicked out of his home. He then fled to Colombia, where a man took him in and repeatedly sodomized him, and the abuse continued even from other males after that. At 18 years old, he started stealing cars for a living and was soon caught and arrested. Apparently, while he was in jail, he was gang raped, and that left him so angry he killed all those involved while he was still in jail. When he got out though, he started killing girls in Peru, and by 1978 he had murdered over 100 people. The police had him but released him, and so he moved to Ecuador, killing up to 3 girls a week. By 1980 he was arrested in an abduction gone wrong and confessed to killing 103 girls, but was released 8 years later for good behavior. Over the next 15 years he was arrested, released, and re-arrested before getting free in 98. He's currently still wanted for killing and over 300 girls in Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. And finally, at number 1 is Xavier Dupont de Ligón. I put this one on the list because unsolved mysteries inspired me, to be honest, and the case is very interesting. So back in April of 2011, the family's neighbor got suspicious when the Ligón's home was boarded up and decided to call the police. The family was nowhere to be found until a letter came saying they had fled to the US since the parents were DEA agents. That was obviously fake, and after several police visits to the house, the bodies of the wife Agnes, the 4 kids, and the 2 dogs were all found buried in their garden. Xavier's body was not there, and neither was his car. So already we have prime suspect number 1, the dad. Now everyone had been shot by a rifle that Xavier had inherited from his dad 3 weeks prior. Apparently he was under crippling debt and had no money left, and as a count, he didn't want his children or the public to know the family was ruined. He also didn't want his kids to suffer any hardships either, so apparently he thought killing them was the best thing to do. After he fled, he didn't even hide. He was still using his credit card at places and waved at a security camera in southeastern France before taking off with his rifle and leaving his car. If he did, is Charlie Chop-Off. Now this person was an unidentified serial killer that had their murderous streak in Manhattan at the start of the 1970s. And this person's victims of choice were people aged 8 to 9 years old. So yeah, they were very young. Now let's go through the victims. The first was 8-year-old Douglas Owens, and Douglas had been mutilated and stabbed a total of 38 times. The next was an unidentified black youth who sustained the same injuries as Douglas but actually managed to survive. The third victim was 9-year-old Wendell Hubbard, then the next year it was 9-year-old Louise Ortiz, again same injuries. Now the last victim was 8-year-old Stephen Cropper, who the killer attacked in August of 73. He ended up bleeding to death on a roof. Now the only suspect police ever thought to arrest was Erno Soto in 1974, and that's because he had confessed to killing Stephen Cropper. The only boy that survived said Soto looked like the killer but refused to 100% confirm that it was him. But he was soon ruled out anyway, since records showed that Soto was in custody at the Manhattan State Hospital at the time of the murders. So whoever this person was got away with it and was never found, which is disgusting. Coming in at number 9 is Antonio Angeles. The Brazilian Spanish criminal grew up in Brazil and was known as a violent person who often beat up his mother. Antonio moved to Spain, where he continued to commit crimes like robbery, mugging, and drug trafficking before finally being involved in the Alcazar girls. On November 13th, 1992, Antonio went for a drive with his friend when they saw 3 girls hitchhiking to a party that a high school was holding at a club. The boys picked them up and passed the venue, after which the girls started screaming because something was wrong. He hit them all with the butt of his gun before tying them all up and taking them to a secluded location. There, all the girls been forced to get into a pit. Antonio then shot and buried them, and their bodies were found in January the following year. The beekeepers who found the bodies found Antonio's friend's glove and a social security slip from Antonio's brother. Antonio was on the run and was last seen somewhere in Lisbon that year. After that, he either boarded a boat going to Ireland and jumped off of it, therefore drowning and dying, or he went back to Brazil. We have no clue. At number 8, we have Elizabeth Ann Duke. I was like, I really need to try and find some women to put on these lists because it's all men. Gender equality, hello. Now Elizabeth was part of a Weatherman splinter group called the May 19th Communist Organization. The group claimed credit for a lot of bombings that damaged US government buildings, including the 83 bombing of the US Capitol building. The attack was motivated by the US military's involvement in Grenada and Lebanon that the group was very opposed to. No one was killed or injured, and the damages added up to around $640,000. Elizabeth was arrested in May of 1985 and was indicted on falsification, conspiracy, and weapons charges. 2 months later, she was released on bail and went missing in October, never to be seen again. There's a $50,000 reward for information regarding her whereabouts, but based on the fact that this is part 5 of these lists, you're not gonna find them. Filling at number 7 slot is Frank Matthews, aka Black Caesar, Pee Wee, Mark the Fourth. This guy really had a lot of A-listers, evidently he thought he was a cool guy. Now Frank was a drug trafficker that sold a lot of cocaine and heroin throughout the east coast of the US from the mid-60s to the early 70s. For some backstory, he led a chicken stealing gang when he was 14 and then went to juvie for assaulting a farmer who caught him in the act. He was released after a year and moved to Philadelphia, where he made his drug connections with members of the Black Mafia. By the 70s, Frank's drug organization was handling multi-million dollars of heroin. He was in charge of 2 huge drug mills in New York, both of which were very heavily guarded. The DEA had been on to him for a while, and with clashes with the Black Mafia, now was the time to catch him. Easter Sunday 1972, the Black Mafia killed Frank's main dealer in Philadelphia. He was charged in Florida for trying to sell 40 pounds of coke and was arrested in January for conspiracy to distribute and tax evasion. He was scheduled to appear in court in July, but apparently took $20 million and fled the country with his girlfriend, leaving his wife and kids behind. I really wonder how that relationship panned out. It probably didn't. He probably killed her too. Really? You'd run away with your girlfriend? Would you not run away with your wife and kids? Surely that means more. Now at number 6 is Leo Burt. On the 24th of August 1970, Sterling Hall, a building on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, was bombed by 4 men, one of which was Leo Burt. The bombings were carried out in retaliation and protest against the university's research connection with the US military. Floors 2 to 4 in that building were housing the Army Mathematics Research Center for the Vietnam War. And we know how polarizing the opinions on the Vietnam War were in America at the time, so I mean, this is no surprise to anyone. The 4 bombers dubbed themselves the New Year's Gang and had been involved in several anti-war acts before the bombing, so this was really no surprise. The incident killed Robert Fastnacht, a PhD researcher, and injured 3 others. Leo was involved in not only making the bomb, but planting it as well. As soon as it was done, Leo and the others fled to Canada as the FBI tracked them. The last time anyone heard from him was on the 30th of August as he and David fled their apartment as police closed in on them. He was indicted for destruction of government property, sabotage, and conspiracy, and is currently still at large. 50 years later, there have been sightings in St. Catharines, Ontario, Lakewood, Washington, but nothing came up. Where are you at, Leo? Coming in at number 5 is Frank Blackhorse. This man's background is extremely debatable. Some say he's a member of the Cherokee Nation, whereas others say he's not even Indian. The FBI think he's Italian Jewish and born in Cleveland, whereas Frank said himself that he was born in Cherokee, North Carolina. Either way, he was part of the Wounded Knee occupation, where followers of the American Indian movement took over and occupied the city of Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. The group wasn't happy with the leadership of Chairman Richard Wilson, and so they decided to do something about it. FBI agents responded to the scene and Agent Curtis Fitzgerald was shot in the wrist. No one knows who fired the bullet, but Blackhorse was arrested and charged with the shooting. Come on man, you got shot in the wrist, you didn't die. Let it go. He was released on a cash bond and was scheduled to appear at trial in August of 1974, but never showed up. He was then named a suspect in a shootout that occurred at Jumping Bull compound that resulted in 2 dead FBI agents. Frank made it on the FBI's most wanted list back in the 70s, and he was actually arrested by the RCMP in Hinton, Alberta. Some sources claim he was extradited to the US, some claim he wasn't, and others believe he was just allowed to roam Western Canada freely. No one knows where he is, but apparently he is the key to finding out who killed those 2 FBI agents. Well, he's not gonna help you now after you basically trialed him for shooting somebody's wrist and he didn't even do it. We don't know. We don't know. There's no evidence. At number 4 is Sukumara Corrup. This guy is one of the most wanted criminals in the state of Kerala. In 1984, he was accused of murdering film representative Chaco and has been in hiding ever since. Chaco was found strangled to death and his body had been burnt inside of a car. Corrup apparently committed the crime and killed the man just to fake his own death and claim Chaco's life insurance. The That ended up being around $75,000, which was quite a lot of money at the time. He then fled abroad while two of his co-accused, his brother-in-law and driver, were sentenced to life in jail. Chaco's murder case is one of the longest standing cases in Kerala, and despite Sukumara's lookalikes popping up here and there, they still haven't managed to track him down. Dude, he ran away with $75,000, killed a man, and left his driver and brother-in-law to rot in jail. Do you really think this guy's gonna be showing up anytime soon in India? Nope. He's living his life in bloody Bali. Filling at number 3 slot is Arthur Lee Washington Jr. Former member of the Black Liberation Army, Arthur was added to the FBI's top 10 most wanted list in October of 1989 after trying to murder a New Jersey state trooper. In April of that year, state trooper Michael J. Clayton stopped a car that had an expired inspection sticker on it. The driver of the car was Arthur, who got out of the car when stopped and just kept walking away from the officer. He ignored all of Clayton's commands, and as he began to go after Arthur, the latter pulled out a gun and fired. He missed, and as Clayton returned the fire and reloaded, Arthur had escaped on foot. After searching his apartment, officers found 3 other weapons, and a federal arrest warrant came very quickly after that. He was kept on the FBI's list for 11 years before being replaced. He's still wanted, but most people believe he's dead because if he was alive, he'd be around 71 years old. So I don't get why you think he was dead. He's probably very much alive. 71? People are alive at that time. Now number 2 is Adam Emery. I honestly feel like this case was of a guy losing his shit over his car getting damaged, and it just went horribly wrong after that. Now back in August of 1990, Adam and his wife Elena were eating at a restaurant when his car was sideswiped by another car. Absolutely livid, he chased down the car and stabbed the driver to death, but turns out it was the wrong car. He ended up murdering 20-year-old Jason Bass and was put in jail for 8 weeks before being bailed out. 3 years later, he was awaiting his formal sentencing since he was convicted of second-degree murder and could have faced up to 25 years in prison. He disappeared along with his wife, and they both mailed notes before their car was found near a bridge. Elena's skull was found at the bottom of the bridge that same day, but Adams was not. He was declared legally dead in 2004, but investigators didn't buy it. He could have easily traveled somewhere after killing his wife. How do we know he didn't do that? People have reported seeing him in Connecticut, then in Florida, then France, and Italy, and last year the FBI actually said there's a huge chance of tracking him down in the next 5 years, so you're going down, Emery. And finally, at number 1 is Mikhail Crawford. This guy did a number on everyone around him. Honestly, I feel bad for anybody who was around him. Vanishing Houdini act, legitimately. So back in July of 1970, Elmer was married to Therese, who was pregnant at the time, and the two already had 3 kids together. 2 weeks before the incidents took place, the family had drafted new wills, leaving a huge fortune to Crawford in case the family died. Don't you already know who the suspect is? Anytime people take out wills, someone's gonna get murdered. He then constructed his own electrocution device using a 15-meter electrical lead and alligator clips. He electrocuted Therese to death in her sleep and then killed and electrocuted the rest of his family. He then loaded all their bodies into his sedan and pushed the whole car off a cliff to try and frame his wife and make the whole thing look like a murder. Elmer has been missing ever since the murders and was last seen in Western Australia in 1994. There's a reward of $100,000 for any information about him, but to be honest, the guy is now 90 years old. He evaded the police his whole life and got away with it. This man will most likely die before ever stepping foot in jail. Like, if I was him and the police caught me, I would rather just drop dead then and there than be like, yeah, take me to jail. Nope.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Quincy Allen. Quincy Allen is a man who went on a crime spree between July and August of 2002 where he took the lives of 4 people. His crime spree was actually inspired while he was in prison serving time for stealing a vehicle. It was here that a fellow inmate decided to start recruiting others and told him that he could get Quincy a job as a mafia hitman. When Quincy was released, he decided to buy a shotgun so he could start practicing. Man, I really wish he showed this kind of dedication to literally anything else. Quincy started off this horrific crime spree on July 7th, 2002 by attacking a 51-year-old homeless man who was sleeping at the time. Luckily, this man was able to survive the attack. His crimes continued until he was arrested on August 14th, 2002. After his arrest and trial, Quincy received a sentence of death and is still on death row awaiting execution. His sentencing did not deter him from the criminal life, however, as in 2009, Quincy, along with another inmate, planned an attack on a correctional officer at the prison they both reside at. at. Quincy was intended to be executed on January 8th, 2010, but there was a stay of execution that was accepted, and as of July 26, 2022, literally just over a month ago, Quincy's death sentence was overturned.
Coming in at number 9 is Matteo Messina Denaro. I've been putting off putting Matteo on the list for quite a while because he was recommended to me so many times. Matteo, also known as Diabolik, has been on the most wanted list since 1993 and is still one of the top 10 most wanted criminals in the world. Now you're probably like, okay, what did he even do? And Matteo was a Sicilian mafia boss in charge of Cosa Nostra. This man was a well-known womanizer and just all-round rich playboy, and when his dad died in 1998, he became the head of the area as well as any neighboring cities. After the mafia boss of Trapani got arrested, Matteo took over that region too, and at one point was commanding over 900 men. Now the mafia makes its money through extortion, drug trafficking, racketeering, as well as bullying people into paying them for protection. Cosa Nostra went on a major terrorist campaign in 1992 and 93 when they bombed Capaci and Via D'Amelio. All the mafia bosses came together and decided to retaliate against the Italian state and launch a bunch of bomb attacks. Those attacks ended up injuring 93 people and killing 10. He then went into hiding and spent his time between Bulgaria and Aspra with his lover Maria Messi, but by 2000 she too had been arrested for aiding and abetting him. In 2002, Matteo was sentenced to life in prison for the bombings, but he can't do a sentence since no one knows where he is. At number 8 we have the Honolulu Strangler, also referred to as the Honolulu Rapist, and he was Hawaii's first serial killer, and they also remained unknown till this day. Now back in the middle of the 80s, the killer murdered 5 women. The first was 25-year-old Vicky Gale Purdy, the second was 17-year-old Regina Sakamu, who'd been strangled and sexually assaulted. The third was 21-year-old Denise Hughes, who suffered the same injuries, and all the women were found with their hands bound behind their backs. The fourth victim was 25-year-old Louise Medeiros, who was killed on her way to the airport. And the final victim was 36-year-old Linda Pischer. But despite having a 27-person task force on the job, no one was found. Witnesses of Linda's murder said the man was of mixed race or white and drove a light-colored van. There's still a $25,000 reward for any information about the killer, but it's been 40 years since the murders took place. Filling on number 7 slot is Chota Shaquille. Now this Indian crime boss worked right under Dawood Ibrahim, who's featured in part 3 of the series if you guys are, paying attention. Now Shaquille joined the Dawood company in 1988 and was essentially managing everything that happened on a day-to-day basis. As one of the most wanted men in India, Shaquille was part of orchestrating the 1993 Bombay bombings and is wanted for terrorism, murder, extortion, and more. He also handled a lot of the company's drug trafficking and also trafficked diamonds from Africa for weapons. Rumor has it he was hiding out in Karachi, Pakistan after a picture surfaced of him for the first time in decades. In 2017, a voice clip came out claiming to be Dawood, saying that Shaquille had died, but that was soon investigated and concluded to be fake as hell, so he's still out there somewhere pretending to be dead. Now at number 6 is Giovanni Motti, another Italian mafia boss for the list. Now Giovanni was also part of the Sicilian mafia and has been on Italy's most wanted list since 1998. When his uncle Matteo died, not the same Matteo as I mentioned before, Giovanni became the de facto head of the Motti mafia clan and became the most powerful man in Palermo. He went into hiding in 1993 since he's wanted for many things, mainly the murder of police officer Beppe Montana and other miscellaneous mafia activities, as they all do. Even the current Italian mafia bosses have no idea where Giovanni is. Some think he's dead, whereas others think he's just hiding somewhere in Agrigento. Who knows? Coming in at number 5 is Roberto Solis, and this one's funny because amongst Roberto's many occupations, poet is one of them, as is convicted murderer and armored car robber. But poet obviously had to be on the list because he's not just a cold-blooded killer, no, he has a creative side as well, you guys. Now Roberto has over 30 aliases and was caught after he murdered a security guard during a robbery. He served 17 years for that and was finally given parole in 92, but those 17 years did nothing for him in terms of growth and retribution. Roberto met a woman called Heather who he convinced to get a job at a security company and guided her into driving away in a car containing $2.5 million. The Bonnie and Clyde duo then went on the run together, became lovers, had a kid, and then evidently didn't work out because Heather turned herself in 2005. Roberto, however, did not and is still out there somewhere, but where, my friends, is their child? At number 4 is Mickey Green. This English drug lord slash gangster sounds like someone auditioning for Britain's Got Talent, not Britain's leading drug dealer. Now Green was the head of the Wembley mob in the 70s, and the group did a lot of armed robberies. He's wanted in multiple countries for smuggling drugs, and he apparently orchestrated the murders of the London criminals Solly Nahom and Gilbert Winter, who is also included in Part 4. Mickey apparently has a bunch of police and detectives under his payroll as well, which explains why he's managed to avoid arrest for over 20 years. After drug trafficker Michael was arrested in 98, and Mickey was arrested in Spain for his involvement in a cocaine trafficking ring, which by the way was worth 150 million pounds. This man himself is worth like 75 million pounds. Like, Mickey may be a criminal, but he's rich as hell. Anyway, he was released after being arrested and went back to Spain, and that's where he remains. Reports came in July of this year claiming he had died, but I don't know if I fully believe that. People fake their deaths all the time, especially if their business and livelihood involves anything like this. Filling at number 3 slot is Renato Cinquegranella, who wins this list's #1 spot for most complicated last name, subject to change. Now Renato was part of Camorra, which is the biggest and oldest mafias in Italy. In the 80s he was involved in torturing and murdering Giacomo Frattini, who was part of another mafia, and all to avenge the murder of a loyalist. Frattini was found in the boot of a car with his hands and heart found in a bag separate from his body, if that gives you any idea how dangerous and deadly Renato actually is. In 2014, Renato was sentenced to life for the murder, but he's been in hiding for quite a while now. I mean, he is one of Italy's most wanted fugitives, so I mean, I'm guessing he's not going to be at the nearest 7-Eleven buying a snack. Now at number 2 is Anders Cameron Stensvig Dale. Did I say the previous last name was hard? This one is the new trophy winner, oh my god. I couldn't actually find the pronunciation of it anywhere online, so I tried my best, you guys. Either way, Anders, also known as Abu Abdurrahman the Norwegian, is a Norwegian terrorist based in Yemen and linked to Al-Qaeda. In 2008, Anders went to Yemen to join Al-Qaeda, and there he learned how to make bombs, car bombs, bomb belts, and more. During this, he broke off contact with his pregnant wife and then married a Moroccan woman in 2010. But by 2012, his family had reported that he was missing. He was already wanted by many countries including the UK and the US. The US and Norwegian intelligence services claimed that in 2015 Anders was still very much alive. Where he is now is anyone's guess. I feel so bad for his pregnant wife, like what the hell? Imagine that happening to you and your husband just completely changing, like, hello, we had a life together, I was about to give birth to our child, but I guess not. I guess you'd rather bomb people, Anders. And finally, at number 1 is Shinsuke Takasugi. I find this one so interesting because Takasugi was a Japanese celebrity. He was an actor and a singer and had a lot of fans. Now most of his fan base came from people who liked Kamen Rider Super 1, where he played the lead role Kazuya Oki. Now the actor became a fugitive after taking advantage of his own fans. Between 2003 and 2012, he told his fans that his character's henshin belt was taken by the Yakuza, which is like the Japanese mafia, and that he needed money to get it back. He never once returned any of the money his fans donated, which amounted to around 50 million yen, which is about $450,000, which is a lot of money, you guys. After the truth came out, he was sued hardcore but never appeared in court and disappeared altogether 3 years ago.
Starting us off, in at number 10, we have A Terrible Friend. Back in 1941, Theodore Coney landed himself in some financial troubles, so he went to visit an old friend that he hasn't seen in a while. But once he got to the house, it was unlocked, and he realized that no one was home. Apparently he doesn't have any manners because he just decided to let himself in. As we were exploring the house, he came across a small door that led to a tiny room in the attic. He decided to live in there because it was much better than living on the streets in the wintertime. Well, keep in mind that this guy never asked his friend for permission. He would sneak out of his hiding place whenever his friend left the house, and he would shower, cook himself meals and watch TV. But one day his friend caught him in the act, and out of panic, Coney shot his friend to death. But instead of fleeing the crime scene and getting the heck out of there, he went right back to his little room. Eventually the police found him hiding in the attic, and he was arrested for the murder. The worst.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer is one of the most famous serial killers of all time, and he managed to elude police for 30 years. From 1973 to 1986, the GSK was responsible for taking the lives of 13 people, harming 50, and 120 different burglaries all across California. Throughout the investigation process, he used different tactics to both taunt and threaten police and victims, which is just another level of being messed up. If you don't know how this story ends, buckle up though, because it is wild. So you know those like family DNA tests like 23andMe where you send in your DNA and then they send you back your genealogy? Well, basically these kinds of services helped identify who the real Golden State Killer was. In 2018, when Detective Paul Holes and FBI lawyer Steve Kramer uploaded the Golden State Killer DNA profile, which they were able to obtain from the crime scenes, to the website GED Match, they were able to find 10 to 20 people who had the same great-great-great-grandparents as this DNA match. From there, a genealogist made a large family tree, and then they were able to single out 2 main suspects. After covertly collecting DNA samples from one of the suspects and comparing them to the crime scene DNA, they were finally able to arrest Joseph James D'Angelo, who is the Golden State Killer. After decades of waiting, the victims of his crimes were finally able to see justice served, as he was sentenced to 12 life sentences plus 8 years. He was spared the death penalty because he admitted to numerous crimes he had perpetrated, some of which he wasn't even being charged for. He is now 75 years old and will definitely spend the rest of his life in prison. In our number 8 spot today, we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York from July of 1976 to July of 1977. He took the lives of 6 people and wounded 7 others, all while eluding the biggest manhunt in New York City history. He was one of those arrogant ones who leaves like little notes for the police promising to do it again, but his arrogant self was caught for his crimes and he was arrested on August 10th, 1977 and was indicted for his crimes. He confessed to all of them and claimed that he was just obeying the orders of a demon that had manifested itself in the form of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. He was found mentally competent to stand trial and he pleaded guilty to his crimes, which left him sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. He later admitted to making up the dog story, which yeah, duh, but he did say that he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as a part of that. These claims were investigated, but no one has ever been able to confirm or deny them. In our number 7 spot today, we have Tex Watson. Tex Watson was one of the central members of the Manson family, which was led by Charles Manson, and he was a willing participant for the horrible Tate and LaBianca crimes that took place on August 9th and 10th, 1969. In October of 1969, Tex knew his arrest was coming, so he fled to his home state of Texas, but was later arrested and extradited back to California. Once he was in California, he refused to talk or eat and ended up losing 55 pounds, which got him sent to get tested to see if he was fit to stand trial, which he was. In 1971, he was convicted on 7 counts of first-degree unalive and 1 count of conspiracy to commit unalive. He originally received a death sentence, but it ended up being commuted to life in prison. Get this, you guys, though, he was able to release a book while in prison, and he got married, and through conjugal visits, he was able to have 4 children. 4 children. But thankfully in 1996 they banned those kinds of visits for people serving life in prison, and in 2003 he got divorced because his wife had met someone else. I hope so. In our number 6 spot today, we have Scott Erskine. Early in life, Scott began to commit violent crimes against others that I truly cannot even speak about here on YouTube, they're so bad. He spent 4 years in prison for one of these crimes when he was around 17 years old, but when he was paroled after the 4 years, he immediately began committing crimes again. In 1993, Scott invited a woman who was waiting for the bus into his home and ended up holding her hostage for several days. After letting her go, he was quickly arrested and ended up being sentenced to 70 years in prison. This is when he had to submit DNA to a database, and in March of 2001, that DNA was matched when the cold cases of the unsolved killings of Jonathan Sellers and Charlie Keever were reopened. In 2004, a jury sentenced him to death, and 6 days later he was transferred to San Quentin. In an interesting turn of events, Scott did die on death row, but it wasn't due to a scheduled execution. Scott died a couple of years ago in July of 2020 after contracting COVID-19. In our number 5 spot today, we have Charles Ng. Charles' story starts off shortly after he moved to the United States on a student visa. He dropped out after his first semester, and soon after he was involved in a hit-and-run accident. He then tried to avoid prosecution by enlisting in the United States Marine Corps, using false documents that stated his birthplace was within the United States. He was arrested by military police a year later for stealing automatic weapons, and then somehow he escaped custody, headed back toward Northern California, and this is where he met Leonard Lake, who is another real piece of work. Charles did end up going away and serving a bit of time, but it was was only 18 months and he was back with Leonard, and that is when the two started their crime spree. It is believed that together the pair took the lives of somewhere from 11 to 25 different people. When Leonard was caught and brought in for questioning, he sneakily took a cyanide pill he had hidden in his jacket and took his own life, but Charles ended up standing trial. He was convicted for 11 of the killings and he remains on death row at San Quentin. In our number 4 spot today we have Sean Great. Sean is a serial killer who committed a series of crimes from 2006 until he was apprehended in 2016. Throughout his decade of criminal activity, it is thought that he took the lives of at least 5 people. So basically, his story is a little confusing, but in September of 2016, Sean was arrested and later indicted for 2 killings as well as a kidnapping and harming a woman whose 911 call actually led to his arrest. At the same time, in another county next door, he was also being charged with 2 other deaths as well as another one from all the way back in 2016. This final count from all of those years ago was actually an unsolved Jane Doe case who had been unidentified for 12 years. When Sean confessed to this crime, he wasn't even sure who she was, he just said he believed her name was Dana. On May 7th, 2018, Sean was convicted on 2 of the counts, and on March 1st, 2019, he pleaded guilty to 2 of the others, and on September 11th, 2019, he pleaded guilty to the additional count. In the end, he was sentenced to death and has remained on death row since that final plea and sentencing, and he is currently scheduled to be executed in 2025. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Zodiac Killer. This one had to make it on this list because while there are a plethora of terrifying people on this list, nothing is as terrifying as an uncaught serial killer, and the Zodiac is definitely the most prolific of them all. The Zodiac Killer took the lives of 5 people in the San Francisco Bay Area between 1968 and October of 1969. He was most known for targeting young couples or a lone male cab driver. Despite 2 people luckily and thankfully escaping his attempted evil doings, he has still never been caught. While no one has heard from the Zodiac since 1974, the case remains active in many different counties, and maybe one day we'll finally know who the real Zodiac is. In our number 2 spot today, we have Dale Hausner and Samuel Dietman. Known as the serial shooters, the crimes these guys committed are definitely on the list of fears I have, which I'm pretty sure spawned from a Criminal Minds episode. These 2 were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006. Basically, they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random drive-by shootings. That's the really scary part. The fire thing is also bad, don't get me wrong. There's just something about completely random violence that absolutely terrifies me. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes. In particular, one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was found guilty of 80 out of the 87 felony charges that were brought forth, and that was all in one single trial. In the end, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Doodler. While this nickname sounds very sweet, it, like everything else on this list, is very sinister. The nickname that this unidentified killer received is due to his practice of sketching his victims before taking their lives. This unidentified killer committed their crimes in the San Francisco area from January of 1974 to September of 1975, and they specifically targeted gay men. It is believed that 14 deaths can be attributed to this killer, while 3 others were injured in the process. Unfortunately, because of the stigma and sensitivity surrounding gay men at the time, the 3 who survived this monster were very reluctant when speaking with the authorities for fear of being outed as a result of it. This has led to there being very little information for them to work with in terms of identifying the man responsible. For a while, there was a primary suspect, but that person has never been officially charged because sadly, none of the survivors felt comfortable enough to testify in court.
Starting off this list, number 10 we have Pedro Lopez, who is by any measure one of the most depraved human beings ever to walk the earth. The former car thief was found guilty of murdering 110 young girls in Ecuador in 1983 and confessed a further 240 murders in the neighboring Peru and Colombia. He said at one point he was raping and killing 3 girls a week. Police only believed this guy when a flash flood happened, like the flash flood came in and it uncovered a mass grave. Absolutely insane. Neighbor takes us to number 9. Over in China, a man started to notice that a lot of his food and personal items started to go missing without any explanation. He lived alone and he was always diligent about locking his door. But when he tried to get into his unit, he was locked out of his apartment, so he decided to call the police. When they searched the apartment, they found a hole in the kitchen ceiling that actually led up to the attic of a 3-story apartment building. Inside of the attic, they found a homeless person who has been sneaking into people's apartments, and he would do this to try to steal money and cook for himself. In total, this guy actually managed to steal $320, but I bet he was able to feed himself delicious meals for a very long time. The stranger who claimed she got permission to live in his attic brings us to number 8. A man named Davis Wallman had no idea what he would uncover when he went to his attic one day. He went up there to investigate a bunch of weird noises, but to his surprise, the door to his own attic was locked. So sadly enough, he decided to knock on the door, but to his surprise, someone actually answered it.
Who the heck are you? Why are you in my house? And she keeps kind of going, this is my house. I live here. I've been here for 3 days. Jimmy said I could live here. Jimmy said I could stay here.
The homeowner quickly called the police, but the strange house guest managed to pack up her stuff and escape before the police were able to come in. How did she think that this was her house? Didn't she see all the pictures on the wall didn't belong to her? I mean, what a weird woman. Creeping into number 7, we have a crazy ex-boyfriend. Back in December of 2010, a woman was getting pretty worried because strange things started happening in her house, and she was almost positive that her crazy ex-boyfriend was the one responsible. Well, one night she went to plug in her phone, but when she went to get it, her phone was gone. She managed to call the police using a landline, and the police arrived at her house and they were able to find someone in the attic. They found her ex-boyfriend hiding underneath some old insulation. He was living there for a long time, spying on his ex-girlfriend. He took her cell phone to check if she was talking to other guys, and he watched her daily. He was arrested, and as it turns out, this wasn't the first time that he broke into an ex-girlfriend's house without their permission. Is this real life right now? I mean, wow, can this guy not just take a hint? I mean, move on. Download Tinder, maybe you'll meet someone new. But oh wait, you're in prison now, so good luck with that. Unless you can like swipe prison inmates or something. I don't know how that. Tinder for prisoners? A food thief is caught in at number 6. I think the only thing worse than having a stranger secretly living in your attic would be if they were also stealing your food. I mean, I hate to go grocery shopping, and if someone stole my food, it means I just have to go grocery shopping more often. I would be pretty upset. I mean, you're already getting free rent. The least you can do is go to the corner store and buy your own damn food. Well, for a man living in Manhattan, he was getting pretty agitated when his food started to mysteriously disappear. I mean, living in Manhattan can't be cheap. So when your expensive food starts to go missing, I'd be pretty upset as well. Which I'm gonna say was a pretty bad idea. Nothing good can ever come from accusing your girlfriend of eating your food. But anyways, I guess he didn't believe her because he set up night vision cameras around his kitchen, and to his surprise, he saw a woman climbing down from the attic and started to make herself a midnight snack. It's unclear how she managed to get inside, but apparently she's been living there for more than 2 weeks. The opposite of Santa Claus comes in at number 5. A family from Pennsylvania noticed that some of their Christmas presents started to go missing on Christmas Eve. They also heard strange noises coming from the attic, and they really believed that someone had broken into their house. They decided to call the police, but they couldn't find anything. On the following day, the family found footprints in the closet of one of the bedrooms that led to the attic. They called the police again. By this time, they brought a dog with them. That's when they found a man living in the attic. Apparently, he used to be a tenant that lived in the other part of the duplex, but he was kicked out, but I guess he moved back in. So instead of leaving and moving on with his life, he moved his things upstairs. Well, he was convicted and sentenced to 23 months in jail, but at least now he is getting rent-free and free food, right? Number 4 takes us to a man who lived in a family's attic, and he snuck into a 14-year-old girl's room at night. I mean, this sounds like every parent's worst nightmare coming true. A man from Tennessee was secretly living in a family's attic, and he would visit their 14-year-old daughter at night. It's just so creepy. Apparently the two of them planned on running away together, but in the meantime, they thought it would be best if he just squatted in the attic while she went to high school. Well, one night the mother was shocked when she saw the man standing at the top of the stairs looking down at her. He quickly ran to the daughter's room and went up to his small home in the attic, but it was too late. The mother called the police and he was arrested for aggravated criminal trespassing. It sounds like this 14-year-old needs to be taught a lesson about picking boyfriends because he definitely doesn't sound like a keeper. An unwanted house guest is up next at number 3. Do you ever wonder what really happens in your house when you're not there? Well, for one woman, she found out the hard way when she called in sick to work and she was home all day with a stranger who was watching her every move. The day went by without anything out of the ordinary, but around 7 p.m., when she went in for a bath, she looked up towards the ceiling and saw that the crawl space to the attic was open, and she saw that someone had been watching her from the attic. Apparently this creeper has been living in her house for the past 6 months. I don't want to terrify you, but if you ever feel like someone is watching you, chances are you're probably right. A new homeowner breaks into our list at number 2. I've heard of squatters and we've seen people living in strangers' attic, but this next story takes the cake. When a man returned home from vacation, he would never thought that he would come home and find strangers have taken over his entire house. When he got home, he saw a strange dog in his backyard, and then out of nowhere, he heard a baby crying inside of his house. He doesn't have a baby. As he went from room to room, he noticed that things had been moved around. He heard people in the house, so he went outside and immediately called 911. When they knocked on the door, a strange woman answered. She was wearing his wife's clothes and acted like she owned the place. The uninvited house guest was later arrested and charged with burglary, neglect of a child, and petty larceny. And guess what? This isn't the first time that something like this has ever happened. Apparently the police get a ton of phone calls about people returning from vacation only to find out that strangers are now living in their house. The ex-boyfriend who just won't quit comes in at number 1. A single mother of 5 to live in a house over in South Carolina. By the end of 2012, she started to notice weird noise coming from her attic and nails were popping out of the ceiling. She went to the attic to investigate, but she wasn't able to find anything, out of the ordinary. She still had a pit in the bottom of her stomach and she just knew that something wasn't right. As the days went on, the plaster on the ceiling started to fall off and she kept hearing some strange noises coming from the attic. She took her nephew and she went to look in the attic again. This time she saw her crazy ex-boyfriend hiding in the corner and it looked like he'd been living up there for like almost a month. He obviously fled the scene and police weren't able to track him down. So if you guys are living in South Carolina right now, you might want to check up on your attic, make sure that this guy isn't sleeping there at nighttime. I mean, if I wake up one morning and my Oreos are gone, I'd be pretty upset.